The station hummed with the sound of 1,000 different species going about their business. Velthar stood at the docking port, his massive frame towering over most creatures nearby. His gray armor-like skin bore the scars of 40 different battles across as many worlds. Each mark told a story of survival, of victory, of the warrior's path he had walked for 80 long years. He was Kryn. His people had ruled the battlefield for 3,000 years. They were born with natural weapons, sharp claws, thick armor plating, and muscles dense as stone. War was in their blood, passed down through generations of conquerors and defenders. Velthar himself had trained since he could walk, fought since he came of age, and led armies since most species were still discovering fire. Now he was here on a cultural exchange program. The Galactic Coalition wanted its members to understand each other better. Velthar thought it was a waste of time, but orders were orders. He was to spend 6 months with the human military, learning their ways, sharing his knowledge. Humans, the newest members of the coalition. Their species had only left their home planet 60 years ago. 60 years. The Kryn had warships older than that. What could these newcomers possibly teach him about warfare? A figure approached him. It was small, barely reaching Velthar's chest. The creature wore a dark blue uniform with strange symbols on the shoulders. Its skin was pale and soft-looking, without any natural protection. No claws, no fangs, no armor plating, just soft flesh wrapped around fragile bones. "Commander Velthar?" the creature said in surprisingly clear galactic common. "I'm Captain Dae-Hyun Kim. Welcome to Station Unity." Velthar looked down at the human. Dae-Hyun extended his hand, a human greeting gesture Velthar had studied. The Kryn warrior carefully touched his claw to the human's palm, trying not to cut the delicate skin. "Captain Kim," Velthar rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "I am honored to be here." It was a polite lie. Velthar felt no honor in this assignment. These humans looked like prey animals, not warriors. Their bodies seemed designed for running away, not fighting. How had they even survived on their home world? What kind of planet had such weak predators that these soft things could evolve? "Please follow me," Dae-Hyun said with a smile. "I'll show you to your quarters. Then we can begin the orientation." As they walked through the station, Velthar observed everything. More humans passed by, all of them small and fragile-looking. Some carried weapons, but the guns looked too large for their frames. Others wore armor, but it was artificial, metal and ceramic plates strapped over their vulnerable bodies. Not like Kryn armor, which was part of their very skin. Dae-Hyun led him through a series of corridors. The human moved with efficiency, but Velthar noted the weakness in every step. Those legs looked like they would snap under real pressure. Those arms seemed too thin to wield heavy weapons. And that neck, so exposed, so easy to break. "You're probably wondering about our size," Dae-Hyun said, glancing back at Velthar. The human's face showed amusement, not offense. Velthar's translator device hummed as it processed his thoughts into words. "I mean no disrespect, Captain. But yes, I am curious. Your people seem less physically adapted for combat than most warrior species." "That's a fair observation," Dae-Hyun replied. "We don't have natural armor or claws. We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we've managed to hold our own." They entered a large room filled with other humans and various alien species. A ceremony was beginning, some kind of welcome event. Velthar stood at the back, his height allowing him to see over everyone's heads. A human female stepped forward to speak. She wore more decorations on her uniform than Dae-Hyun. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes scanned the crowd with sharp intelligence. "Welcome, everyone, to this cycle's exchange program," she said. Her voice was strong, despite coming from such a small body. "We gather here to learn from each other, to share our experiences, and to build stronger bonds between our peoples." Velthar listened with half his attention. He had heard such speeches 100 times before. Unity, cooperation, shared strength, the usual diplomatic phrases. His mind wandered to his combat logs. He would need to review them later, update his personal database of tactics and strategies. After the ceremony ended, another human approached. This one wore different markings, medical insignia, Velthar recognized. "Commander Velthar, I'm Lieutenant Haywan Park," she said. "I'm the combat medic assigned to Captain Kim's unit. I'll be part of your observation team." Velthar studied her. Even smaller than Dae-Hyun, with delicate hands that looked like they belonged to an artist, not a soldier. "You treat wounded in battle?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Haywan replied. 15 years of service. 15 years. This tiny creature had been in combat zones for 15 years. Velthar found that hard to believe. Most species that fragile would be dead within their first engagement. Perhaps humans kept their medics far from the fighting, safe behind the lines. "Come," Dae-Hyun said. "Let me show you our training facility. I think you'll find it interesting." They walked to another section of the station. Through windows, Velthar could see humans exercising. They lifted weights, ran on machines, practiced with weapons. All of it looked so primitive. The Kryn trained by fighting each other in real combat, scales against scales, claws against claws. These humans played with metal bars and pretended to shoot targets that didn't shoot back. "Tomorrow, we'll begin the real orientation," Dae-Hyun explained. "I'll show you our history, our tactics, our philosophy of warfare. I think you might be surprised." Velthar doubted that. He had seen 1,000 different species try to call themselves warriors. Most of them were just scavengers with guns, hiding behind technology to make up for their natural weakness. Humans seemed no different. That night, in his quarters, Velthar recorded his initial assessment in his personal log. "Day 1 among the humans," he spoke into the recording device. "Initial observations confirm earlier intelligence. The species is physically inferior to any warrior race I have encountered. Small frames, soft skin, no natural weapons or defenses. Average height, 1.7 meters. Average weight, 70 kilograms. Fragile bone structure. Vulnerable organs poorly protected." He paused, thinking about what he had seen. "They claim to be warriors. They wear the uniforms and carry the weapons. But I cannot understand how such creatures survive their own evolution. What kind of world produces predators this weak? How did they defend themselves before they developed technology?" Velthar looked out the window at the stars beyond. 6 months with these humans. 6 months watching them pretend to be soldiers. I expect I will spend most of my time teaching them what real warfare looks like. Perhaps this exchange will benefit them more than me. They clearly have much to learn." He ended the recording and settled into his rest position. Tomorrow would bring more observations, more evidence of human weakness. He would catalog it all, make his report, and return to his people with the knowledge that the Kryn remained supreme in the art of war. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a small thought bothered him. Dae-Hyun had smiled when Velthar mentioned their physical weakness. Not the smile of someone embarrassed or offended, the smile of someone who knew a secret. Velthar pushed the thought away. He was a warrior of the Kryn. He had fought for 80 years across 40 campaigns. These humans, with their 60 years in space and their fragile bodies, could teach him nothing. He would learn how wrong he was very soon. The records room was cold and quiet. Velthar followed Captain Dae-Hyun through rows of data terminals and holographic display units. The human moved with purpose, like someone who had walked this path many times before. "This is where we keep our military history," Dae-Hyun explained. "Everything from our first conflicts on Earth to our most recent engagements in space. I thought we should start here, so you understand where we come from." Velthar nodded. History could be useful. It would show him how humans fought, what mistakes they made, how they learned. Every species had a story of war, and those stories revealed their true nature. A woman in a colonel's uniform waited for them. She was older than Dae-Hyun, with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Commander Velthar, this is Colonel Bo-Ra Choi," Dae-Hyun introduced. "She's our chief military historian." "Welcome," Bo-Ra said, her voice formal. "Captain Kim tells me you want to understand human warfare. I've prepared some materials that should be enlightening." She activated a holographic display. Numbers and images floated in the air between them. 12 years ago, we encountered a species called the Void Swarm, Bo-Ra began. Insectoid hive creatures. Extremely aggressive, no interest in diplomacy, reproduction rate off the charts. They attacked 17 of our colony worlds simultaneously. Velthar knew of the Void Swarm. The Kryn had fought them 50 years ago. It had been a brief war, 3 years from first contact to complete victory. The swarm was dangerous but predictable. Overwhelming force applied at their hive worlds had broken them quickly. "The Kryn defeated the swarm in 3 years," Velthar said, "with minimal casualties, less than 1,000 warriors lost." "Yes," Bo-Ra agreed. "We studied your campaign extensively. Very efficient. We, on the other hand, fought them for 12 years. We lost 6 billion people." The number hit Velthar like a physical blow. 6 billion? That was more than the entire Kryn population. How could any species survive losing so many? "But," Bo-Ra continued, pulling up more data, "we want you to look at the casualty ratios. For every human killed, we eliminated approximately 50,000 swarm units." Velthar's eyes narrowed as he studied the numbers. The math didn't make sense. If humans were losing billions but killing at those ratios, then the total swarm losses would be 300 trillion, Dae-Hyun said quietly. "We killed 300 trillion swarm organisms over 12 years. "That's impossible," Velthar said. "The swarm doesn't have those numbers. Even with their breeding rate." "They didn't have those numbers when they attacked us," Bo-Ra interrupted. "But the war lasted 12 years. They bred during that time. We fought them on 6,000 different planets at the same time. Some of our forces went years without resupply. No ammunition, no food shipments, no reinforcements. Just them and whatever they could scavenge from swarm corpses and destroyed colonies." Velthar felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Unease. The Kryn had won through superior firepower and tactics. They had struck hard and fast, never allowing the swarm to establish a foothold. But fighting for 12 years? On 6,000 worlds? Without resupply? "I don't understand," he admitted. "Why did your forces not retreat? Why accept such losses?" Dae-Hyun and Bo-Ra exchanged glances. The colonel touched a control, and new images appeared. Planets burning, cities overrun, civilians fleeing. "Because there was nowhere to retreat to," Dae-Hyun said. "Every world we abandoned, the swarm consumed. Every population we didn't defend died. We couldn't strike at their hive worlds like you did because we didn't have enough ships. We were too new to space warfare, too inexperienced. So we had to hold the line at every single planet with whatever forces we had." Bo-Ra pulled up a personnel file. "Let me introduce you to Sergeant Hyun-Ki Lee. He served on Novara 4 for 8 years of the war." A man appeared in the hologram. He looked tired, his uniform dirty, his face scarred. Most notably, his right arm was missing, replaced with a crude mechanical prosthetic. "Sergeant Lee lost his arm in the 2nd year of fighting," Bo-Ra explained. "A swarm warrior tore it off during close combat. He survived, recovered, and returned to the front lines 3 months later." "With an artificial limb?" Velthar asked. "How could he fight effectively?" "Watch," Dae-Hyun said. The hologram shifted to combat footage. Velthar saw Hyun Ki moving through a ruined building, his prosthetic arm holding a rifle. Swarm creatures rushed at him from multiple directions. The sergeant's movements were precise, economical. He dropped 3 attackers with headshots, then used his prosthetic arm to crush the skull of a 4th that got too close. The prosthetic is stronger than his original arm, Bo-Ra noted. Many soldiers who lost limbs chose to return to combat rather than accept medical discharge. They said their friends needed them. Velthar watched more footage. Soldiers fighting with injuries that would have killed most Kryn. A human with a massive chest wound, still firing her weapon. Another with both legs broken, dragging himself forward to throw grenades. A medic performing surgery on a wounded comrade while explosions rocked the building around them. "Stop," Velthar said. "Go back. That medic—" The image rewound. A young woman in medical gear, her hands bloody, worked frantically on a soldier's torn abdomen. Swarm creatures pounded on the doors. Other humans fired to keep them back. The medic never looked up, never stopped working. "Lieutenant Haewon Park," Dae-hyun said softly. 15 years ago, fresh out of medical school. This was her first deployment. The same person Velthar had met yesterday. The small, delicate woman with artist's hands. He watched as the footage continued. The wounded soldier survived. Haewon moved to the next casualty, then the next, working for what the timestamp showed was 14 hours straight. "I want to see more," Velthar heard himself say. For the next 3 hours, they showed him battle after battle. Colonel Bo-Ra walked him through the entire 12-year war, explaining strategies, showing footage, presenting casualty reports. With each new piece of information, Velthar's understanding shifted. He saw human soldiers holding positions for months without relief. He watched them fight with broken weapons, improvised ammunition, expired rations. On one world, a unit of 200 humans held a mountain pass against 50,000 swarm for 3 years. "How?" Velthar demanded, his translator struggling to process his emotional state. "How did they survive? The Kryn would have broken under such conditions. Any warrior would." "Humans are very good at not breaking," Dae-hyun said simply. "We're very good at continuing when stopping would be easier." Bo-Ra pulled up psychological reports. "We studied this extensively during and after the war. Other species have breaking points, specific conditions under which their soldiers become unable to fight. For most species, continuous combat longer than 30 to 40 days causes permanent psychological damage. Soldiers go catatonic, or become unable to make decisions, or lose the will to fight. The Kryn break after 40 days of continuous engagement," Velthar admitted. "It is a known limit. We rotate troops to prevent it." "Humans don't seem to have that limit," Bo-Ra said. "Or rather, our limit is much, much higher. We found soldiers who fought continuously for over 2 years without rotation. They suffered psychological trauma, yes. Many still deal with it today, but they didn't break. They kept fighting." She brought up brain scans, genetic analyses, evolutionary studies. "Our scientists believe it's connected to our evolution as persistence hunters. Our ancestors would track prey for days, sometimes weeks, never giving up, never stopping. That ability to just keep going is written into our biology." Velthar stared at the data. His worldview, built over 80 years of warfare, was crumbling. He had thought humans were weak, but this wasn't weakness. This was something else entirely, a creature that wouldn't break. A species that could suffer losses that would destroy any other race and still continue fighting. Bodies that could function far beyond normal limits. Minds that refused to surrender even when surrender made logical sense. "You're not weak," Velthar said slowly. "You're terrifying." Dae-hyun smiled that same knowing smile from yesterday. "We're survivors, Commander. Our homeworld was harsh. We had to be." I need to think, Velthar said. His voice came out rougher than intended. Of course, Bora said. Take all the time you need. When you're ready, we have more to show you. More? Velthar's chitinous plates vibrated slightly, a Kryn physiological response to deep disturbance. What more could there possibly be? As he left the records room, he passed Sergeant Hyun Ki in the corridor. The man nodded respectfully. Velthar looked at the prosthetic arm, then at the man's eyes. Those eyes had seen years of horror and kept fighting anyway. Sergeant, Velthar said, may I ask you a question? Of course, Commander. Why did you go back? After losing your arm, why return to combat? Hyun-Ki looked at his prosthetic, flexing the mechanical fingers. Because my friends were still fighting. Because people needed defending. Because giving up wasn't an option. He met Velthar's gaze. Besides, I could still hold a rifle. As long as I could do that, I belonged on the line. The sergeant walked away, leaving Velthar standing alone in the corridor. The Kryn warrior felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Not fear of the humans themselves. Fear of what they represented. A species that would endure anything, survive everything, and never stop coming. A species that turned suffering into a weapon. Velthar returned to his quarters and sat in silence for a long time. Finally, he updated his log. Day 2. I was wrong. So very wrong. Velthar couldn't sleep. The images from the records room played in his mind like a continuous loop. Human soldiers fighting with impossible determination, surviving conditions that would kill any Kryn warrior. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. These small, fragile creatures who refused to die, refused to break, refused to stop. He needed to understand more. The next morning, Captain Dae-Hyun arrived at his quarters earlier than planned. I thought you might want to meet someone, the human said. Major Jinwoo Kang. He commanded a unit during the Void Swarm War. I think his story might answer some of your questions. They walked to a different section of the station. This area was quieter, with fewer people moving through the corridors. Dae-Hyun explained that it housed veterans who were between assignments, resting or transitioning to new posts. The room they entered was simple. A table, a few chairs, windows showing the stars beyond. A man sat at the table reviewing something on a data pad. He looked up as they entered. Major Jinwoo was probably in his 40s by human standards. His hair had touches of gray, and his face carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. But his eyes were sharp, alert. He stood and offered his hand to Velthar. Commander, Captain Kim tells me you're trying to understand how we humans fight. Yes, Velthar rumbled. I have seen the records. The numbers. But numbers do not explain everything. I need to hear it from someone who was there. Jinwoo nodded and sat back down. What do you want to know? Arcturus 7th, Velthar said. He had studied the battle reports last night. You held a mountain range for 8 years, 200 soldiers against 50,000 swarm. The mathematics of that engagement make no sense. A sad smile crossed Jinwoo's face. No, I suppose they don't. Not from an outside perspective. Tell me how you survived, Velthar said. Explain it to me. Jinwoo was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. We didn't plan to be there for 8 years. When the swarm hit Arcturus 7, we were supposed to delay them for a week, buy time for civilians to evacuate. Then we'd pull back to the orbital defense platforms. But the evacuation took longer than expected. Children, elderly, sick people, they moved slower than the planners thought. So a week became 2 weeks, then 3. Then the orbital platforms fell, and there was nowhere to pull back to. Jinwoo pulled up a holographic map showing the mountain range. This was our position. Natural choke points, good defensive terrain. The swarm couldn't bring their full numbers to bear. They had to come at us through narrow passes, which leveled the playing field somewhat. 200 against 50,000 is not level, Velthar pointed out. No, Jinwoo agreed. It's not, but we had high ground. We had supplies cached in the mountains, and we had something the swarm didn't. What? We knew why we were fighting. Every day we held that line. The evacuation ships took more people to safety. Families, children, people who would live because we stayed and fought. Velthar's translator hummed as he processed this. But 8 years? You said the evacuation took weeks, maybe months. Why stay after that? Jinwoo's expression darkened. Because by the time the evacuation finished, we couldn't leave. The swarm had surrounded us completely. We were cut off. No communication with command, no resupply, no extraction possible. Just us in the mountains and an enemy that never stopped coming. The room was very quiet. Even Dae-hyun, who had probably heard this story before, stood in respectful silence. We had rations for 3 months, Jinwoo continued. Emergency supplies meant to feed 200 people for 90 days. We made them last 8 months by cutting portions, by going hungry, by finding alternative food sources in the mountains, plants, insects, things that probably weren't safe to eat, but we ate them anyway. Velthar felt his plates vibrating again. And ammunition? We had standard combat loads. Maybe 2,000 rounds per soldier plus the ammunition for our heavy weapons. Sounds like a lot, right? Jinwoo laughed bitterly. It's not. Not when you're fighting for 8 years. We learned to make every shot count. We scavenged swarm weapons, figured out how to use them. We made bullets from salvaged materials, even though they had a high failure rate. He pulled up images on his datapad. Mountains littered with bodies, crude fortifications, exhausted soldiers with hollow eyes. We started with 200. By the end of year 1, we were down to 150. Year 2, 120. Year 3. He paused. Year 3 was bad. We lost 40 people in 6 months. Disease mostly. Infected wounds, malnutrition. A broken bone could be a death sentence because we didn't have proper medical supplies. Why didn't you surrender? Velthar asked. It was the question that bothered him most. The swarm might have... The swarm doesn't take prisoners, Jinwoo interrupted. They don't negotiate. They consume. Every sentient species is just food or building material to them. Surrender meant becoming feed for their larvae. He met Velthar's eyes. We chose to die fighting rather than die screaming in their breeding pits. Another person entered the room, a woman in civilian clothes, though she carried herself like military. Dae-hyun introduced her as Dr. Sun-hee Yoon, a xenopsychologist who studied combat stress across different species. I asked Dr. Yoon to join us, Dae-hyun said. She can explain some of the science behind what Major Kang experienced. Sun-hee nodded to everyone and sat down. Commander Velthar, you mentioned that Kryn warriors have a psychological breaking point at around 40 days of continuous combat. Is that correct? Yes, Velthar confirmed. After that time, even our strongest warriors begin to suffer catatonic episodes. Their minds shut down to protect themselves from the stress. We must rotate troops to prevent this. Most species have similar limits, Sun-hee explained. The Vren break at 30 days, the Horth at 60, the Takari at 20. It's a survival mechanism. The brain forces the body to stop before permanent damage occurs. But humans fought for 2,847 consecutive days on Arcturus VII, Velthar said, looking at Jinwoo. How is that possible? Human stress biology is different, Sun-hee said. We evolved as persistence hunters on Earth. Our ancestors would track prey for days, sometimes weeks, never giving up. They would walk their targets to exhaustion and death. This ability shaped our physiology in unique ways. She pulled up brain scans comparing different species. When other species experience extreme prolonged stress, their higher brain functions shut down. It's automatic, unavoidable. But human brains adapted differently. We don't shut down. We adapt. We enter what we call survival mode. I don't understand, Velthar admitted. Our bodies produce different hormone combinations, Sun-Hee explained. We can function on minimal sleep for extended periods. We can suppress hunger signals. We can continue performing complex tasks even when exhausted. Our stress response doesn't break us. It makes us more efficient, more focused on survival. Jin-Woo spoke up. She's describing it scientifically. I can tell you what it felt like. After the first year, we stopped feeling normal things. Hunger became just background noise. Fear became something we ignored. We slept in 2-hour shifts, always ready to fight. Time stopped meaning anything. There was just the next attack, the next defense, the next day to survive. But the psychological cost? Velthar pressed. Surely there was damage. Oh, there was damage, Jin-Woo said quietly. I still can't sleep through a full night. Loud noises make me reach for weapons that aren't there. I see my dead soldiers in crowds sometimes, just for a moment. Every one of us who survived came back broken in some way. Then why do it? Velthar demanded. Why push yourselves to that point? Jin-Woo looked at him for a long moment. Because we could. Because someone had to. Because giving up wasn't an option as long as we could still pull a trigger. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the stars. You want to know the worst part? The thing that still keeps me awake? We were there for 8 years. 8 years of hell. And when relief finally came, when ships broke through the swarm blockade and found us, there were 41 of us left. 41 out of 200. His voice was steady, but Velthar could see the human's hands shaking slightly. The rescue commander asked me why we didn't try to break out, try to escape. I told him the truth. We stayed because we were soldiers, and soldiers don't run. We stayed because every day we held that position, we killed thousands of swarm that couldn't attack somewhere else. We stayed because our friends died doing this, and leaving would make their deaths meaningless. Velthar felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't just about physical endurance or psychological resilience. This was about purpose, about will, about a species that had weaponized their own capacity for suffering. Commander, Dr. Sun-Hee said gently, humans don't just endure war. We're evolutionarily designed for it. Not because we're aggressive, but because we're survivors. We can outlast almost anything. The question isn't whether we'll break. It's whether anything can last long enough to break us. Velthar stood silent, processing everything he'd heard. In 80 years of warfare, he had never encountered anything like this. The Kryn were formidable warriors, yes, strong, skilled, experienced. But they had limits. Every species had limits. Except, apparently, humans. They had limits too, but those limits were so far beyond normal that they might as well not exist. Thank you, Major, Velthar said finally, for sharing your story, for helping me understand. Jin-Woo turned from the window. Do you? Understand, I mean? I'm beginning to, Velthar admitted. Though I wish I wasn't. Why's that? Because it's terrifying, Velthar said honestly. A species that won't break, won't surrender, won't stop. That's not just a military advantage. That's an existential threat to anyone who makes you their enemy. Jin-Woo smiled grimly. We prefer to think of it as being very good friends and very bad enemies. As they left the room, Velthar's mind was reeling. He had thought he understood warfare. He had thought 80 years of experience had taught him everything about combat, about soldiers, about what it took to win. He had been wrong. These humans had shown him a type of warfare he'd never imagined. Not through superior technology or tactics, but through sheer, relentless, terrifying persistence. And they still had more to show him. 3 days had passed since Velthar met Major Jin-Woo. 3 days of reviewing more records, watching more footage, learning more about human combat operations. Each new piece of information shattered his previous assumptions. but there was still something he didn't understand. He had seen what humans endured in war. Now he needed to know how they prepared for it. Captain Dae-hyun seemed to read his thoughts. "You want to see our training facilities, don't you?" "Yes," Velthar confirmed. "The Swarm War ended 12 years ago. An entire generation of humans has come of age since then. How do you prepare soldiers who haven't experienced such horrors? How do you train them to endure what veterans like Major Kang endured?" Dae-hyun's expression became serious. "I think you need to meet Sergeant Nari Song. She runs our Special Operations Training Program." They took a shuttle down to the training complex on the planet below. It was a massive facility, sprawling across hundreds of kilometers of harsh terrain. Mountains, jungles, deserts, frozen tundra. Every hostile environment recreated for training purposes. A woman waited for them at the entrance. Sergeant Nari was compact and muscular, her dark hair cut short, her eyes sharp as broken glass. She looked at Velthar without any sign of intimidation, despite his massive size. "Commander Velthar," she said with a respectful nod. "Welcome to Hell." "Hell?" Velthar's translator processed the word and its cultural meaning. "That's what the recruits call this place," Nari explained with a slight smile. "And they're not wrong. Follow me." They walked through the facility. Through windows, Velthar could see humans running with enormous packs on their backs. Others crawled through mud under barbed wire while instructors fired training weapons over their heads. The sounds of shouting, of people pushing themselves to their limits, filled the air. "This is basic conditioning," Nari explained. "Every recruit goes through this, 6 months of constant physical and mental challenges." Velthar watched a group struggling up a muddy hill, their faces twisted with effort. They carried what looked like heavy equipment, moving as a unit despite obvious exhaustion. "How heavy are those packs?" he asked. 50 kilograms, Nari replied, plus their weapons and gear. Total load about 70 kilograms. Velthar did the mental calculation. These humans weighed maybe 60 to 80 kilograms themselves. They were carrying loads equal to their own body weight. For how long? This particular exercise? 12 hours. They'll cover 40 kilometers before they're done. And if they fail? They rest briefly, then try again. We don't accept failure. We accept learning. Eventually, everyone completes the course or decides the military isn't for them. They moved to another area. Here, Velthar saw recruits going through what appeared to be a nightmare obstacle course. Walls to climb, pits to cross, structures to navigate while carrying wounded comrades. "Watch this one," Nari said, pointing to a young private struggling with a particularly difficult climb. His name tag read Tae-Yang O. Private Tae-Yang reached for a handhold, missed, and fell into a water pit below. He surfaced, coughing, and immediately began climbing again. He fell 3 more times before successfully making it over the wall. "He's been at this for 2 hours, Nari noted. "He could quit any time. No one would blame him, but he won't." "Why not?" "Because his team is on the other side, waiting for him. Because quitting means letting them down, because human soldiers don't leave anyone behind." Velthar watched Tae-Yang finally clear the obstacle. The young human collapsed on the other side, gasping for air, but his teammates immediately helped him up, and they continued together. "This is basic training," Velthar said slowly. "You mentioned special operations. What does that training involve?" Nari's smile turned predatory. "Want to see?" They entered a classified section of the facility. The environment here was different, more controlled, more intense. Nari explained as they walked. Special operations candidates go through what we call SEER training: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. We teach them to survive in any environment, evade capture, resist interrogation, and escape if taken prisoner. She brought them to a monitoring room where they could observe without being seen. Below, in a simulated hostile environment, Velthar watched human trainees being hunted by instructors playing enemy forces. "They've been out there for 5 days," Nari explained. "Limited food, minimal water, no shelter. They have to evade capture while completing objectives. If caught, they face interrogation." "Interrogation?" Velthar asked. "Simulated, of course. We don't actually harm them, but we subject them to stress positions, sleep deprivation, psychological pressure. They need to learn what it feels like to be a prisoner so they can resist if it happens for real." Velthar felt his plates vibrating again. The Kryn trained hard, certainly, but they didn't deliberately subject their warriors to torture, even simulated torture. "This seems—" He struggled for words. "Extreme." "It is," Nari agreed. "But in real war, the enemy won't show mercy. Better to experience a controlled version here than face the real thing unprepared." She pulled up statistics on a screen. "This particular course has a 70% failure rate. Most candidates can't handle the psychological pressure. Those who succeed move on to even harder training." "Even harder?" Velthar couldn't imagine what could be harder than what he'd just seen. "Hell Week," Nari said. 5 days, 4 hours of total sleep. Constant physical challenges, mental stress, everything designed to push them past their breaking point. She showed him footage from a previous Hell Week. Humans running on beaches with logs over their heads, swimming in frigid water, carrying boats while instructors screamed at them. All of it happening in the middle of the night or in driving rain, or both. "They do this for 5 days straight?" Velthar asked. "With only 4 hours of sleep total, spread across the entire week," Nari confirmed. "Usually in 15 or 20-minute increments, just enough to keep them functional but not enough to actually rest." "What's the purpose?" "To find out who will quit when things get impossible. To identify those who can push through any obstacle. Because in real combat, you don't get to choose when things get hard. You don't get breaks. You have to keep going or people die." She switched to live footage. "We actually have a Hell Week class running right now. They're on day 4. Velthar watched humans who looked like walking corpses. Their eyes were hollow, their movements mechanical. Some were shivering despite wearing wetsuits. Others looked like they might collapse at any moment. But they kept moving, step after step, task after task. When one stumbled, the others held them up. When someone's grip failed, teammates helped them hold on. 40% will quit before the end," Nari said quietly. "The 60% who finish this become candidates for our most elite units." "Candidates?" Velthar asked. "You mean this isn't the final selection?" "This is just the beginning," Nari replied. "After Hell Week, they go through months more specialized training, combat diving, high-altitude operations, urban warfare, counterterrorism, survival training for every environment imaginable." She pulled up more data. "The entire pipeline from start to finish takes about 2 years. Of every 100 candidates who start, maybe 10 finish. And those 10 become some of the most capable soldiers in human space." Velthar thought about the veterans he'd met. Major Jin Woo and his survivors from Arcturus 7th. Sergeant Hyun Ki with his prosthetic arm. Lieutenant Hai Wan operating under fire. Had they all gone through training like this? "The soldiers who fought the Void Swarm," he said. "Did they have this training?" "Most of them, no," Nari admitted. "The war started before we had fully developed these programs. Many of them learned on the job, under actual combat conditions. We built these courses based on what they endured, what they learned, what they survived." She gestured at the trainees, struggling through their exercises. "These people have it easier than the Swarm War veterans did, because we can simulate horror in a controlled environment. We can break them down and build them back up without actually killing them. The veterans didn't have that luxury. They had to endure the real thing." Velthar was silent for a long time, watching the Hell Week candidates. One of them collapsed face first into the mud. Velthar expected instructors to pull them out, to end their suffering. Instead, the trainees' teammates surrounded them, lifted them up, supported their weight while whispering encouragement. The fallen candidate found strength somewhere and started moving again, held upright by their team. "You trained them to suffer," Velthar said finally. "No," Nari corrected. "We trained them to continue despite suffering. There's a difference. Suffering is inevitable. Giving up is optional." The Kryn would call this cruel. "Maybe it is," Nari acknowledged. "But it works. When these soldiers deploy to real combat zones, nothing surprises them. They've already been pushed to their limits and beyond. They know what it feels like to want to quit and keep going anyway." Dae-hyun spoke up. "Remember what Major Kang told you about how his unit stayed on Arcturus 7 for 8 years? They weren't superhuman. They were just ordinary soldiers who had been trained to never give up, who had internalized the idea that quitting wasn't an option." Velthar watched a trainee pull themselves up a rope with arms that were clearly exhausted. The human made it halfway, slipped, caught themselves, and kept climbing. Finally reaching the top, they rang a bell and collapsed. "I think I finally understand," Velthar said quietly. "Understand what?" Nari asked. "Why humans are so terrifying in war. It's not just that you endure suffering. You prepare for it. You deliberately subject yourselves to controlled hell so that real hell doesn't break you." He turned to look at Nari. "You weaponize your own capacity for misery." Nari considered this. "That's one way to look at it. I prefer to think we're building resilience, teaching our people that they're stronger than they think, that they can overcome anything if they refuse to quit." "And it works?" "You've seen the evidence," Dae-hyun said. 12 years against the Void Swarm, thousands of last stands like Arcturus the 7th, soldiers fighting with impossible injuries, in impossible conditions, for impossible lengths of time. It works because we train for exactly that kind of impossibility." Velthar looked back at the Hell Week candidates. One of them met his eyes for just a moment, a young human with mud-covered face and determined eyes. In that moment, Velthar didn't see weakness. He saw something that scared him deeply. He saw an entire species that had turned suffering into strength, that had made endurance their greatest weapon. "Thank you for showing me this," Velthar told Nari. "Did it answer your questions?" "Yes," Velthar replied. "And created many new ones, but mainly it confirmed what I suspected." "What's that?" "That humans are the most dangerous species I've ever encountered," Velthar said. "Not because you're the strongest or fastest or most advanced, but because you simply will not stop. Ever." Nari smiled. "Good. That's exactly what we want potential enemies to think." As they left the training facility, Velthar's mind was reeling yet again. He had one more meeting scheduled, with a fleet admiral who would explain human strategic doctrine. But already Velthar knew what his report would say. Never fight humans. Never make them your enemy. Because they would outlast you, outendure you, and keep coming long after any rational species would have surrendered. The Kryn were warriors, but humans were survivors, and in the end, survivors always won. The Admiral's office was located in the command section of the station, overlooking the vast expanse of space. Admiral Young-ho Baek sat behind a desk made of some dark wood, an unusual choice in an age of metal and composite materials. The walls displayed maps of human territory, ship deployments, and strategic data. Velthar had spent the last week learning about humanity, about their wars, their warriors, their training. Each revelation had shaken his understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. Now he would learn how they thought about warfare at the highest level. "Commander Velthar," Admiral Young-ho said, standing to greet him. The Admiral was older, maybe 60 by human standards, with silver hair and eyes that had seen decades of command decisions. "Please sit. Captain Kim tells me you've had quite an education this week." "That is one way to describe it," Velthar said, settling into a reinforced chair designed for larger species. "Admiral, I came here thinking I would teach humans about warfare. Instead, I have learned that everything I thought I knew was incomplete." Young-Ho smiled slightly. "That's a humble admission from someone with your experience. 80 years of service across 40 campaigns. The Kryn have much to be proud of." "We are skilled warriors," Velthar agreed, "but I am beginning to think we don't truly understand war the way humans do." "Tell me about Kryn warfare," the Admiral said, leaning back in his chair. "I'd like to understand your perspective." Velthar organized his thoughts. "The Kryn way is based on superiority. We are naturally strong, naturally armored. We train from birth to fight efficiently and honorably. Our tactics emphasize decisive action, quick strikes with overwhelming force. We study our enemies, identify their weaknesses, and exploit them ruthlessly." "Sounds effective," Young-Ho observed. "It is. We have won virtually every conflict we've entered. When we fought the Void Swarm, we analyzed their hive structure, identified their central command organisms, and destroyed them with precision strikes. The war lasted 3 years and cost fewer than 1,000 Kryn lives." "And you consider this success?" "Of course. Minimum casualties, maximum efficiency, complete victory." Young-Ho nodded thoughtfully. "Let me tell you how humans approach warfare, Commander. We start from a very different position than you do." He pulled up an image of Earth, the human homeworld. Velthar had seen it before, a blue and green planet, unremarkable in most ways. "We evolved on this world without any natural advantages," the Admiral began. "No claws, no armor, no venom. We were relatively slow, relatively weak. By all accounts, we should have been prey animals, not predators." "Yet you survived," Velthar said. "We did more than survive. We became the dominant species. Do you know how? Your intelligence? Your ability to make tools?" "Partially," Young-Ho agreed. "But many species have intelligence and make tools. What made humans special was something else. We could outlast anything. We were persistence hunters. We would track prey for days, weeks, if necessary, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. We didn't need to be faster or stronger. We just needed to keep going." The Admiral pulled up more images. Ancient human history, wars, conflicts, struggles spanning millennia. "This shaped everything about us," he continued. "Our bodies evolved to function on minimal resources. Our minds developed the ability to push through pain, through fear, through exhaustion. And our cultures built entire philosophies around the idea that surrendering is worse than dying." Velthar listened intently as Young-Ho continued. "When we reached space and encountered other species, we discovered something interesting. Most galactic civilizations had relatively peaceful histories once they developed advanced technology. Wars were brief, conducted with rules and honor, ended when one side clearly dominated." "That is the civilized way," Velthar said. "Perhaps," Young-Ho replied. "But humans had a different experience. We spent 10,000 years in near-constant warfare with each other. We had conflicts that lasted 100 years. We invented weapons capable of destroying our entire planet multiple times over, and we still didn't destroy ourselves." He pulled up historical data that made Velthar's plates vibrate with unease. Wars with death tolls in the tens of millions, weapons of such horrific power that they could vaporize cities, conflicts fought with gas, with disease, with every conceivable method of killing. "We learned things other species never had to learn," Young-Ho explained. "We learned that wars aren't won by superior technology alone. They're won by who can endure the longest, who can keep fighting when fighting seems pointless, who refuses to surrender even when surrender is the logical choice." "This philosophy almost destroyed you," Velthar observed, looking at the casualty figures. It did, the Admiral admitted, but it also made us what we are. When the Void Swarm attacked, we couldn't use your tactics. We didn't have the firepower for precision strikes. We didn't have the resources to end things quickly. So we did what humans do best. You endured. We endured, Young-Ho confirmed. We fought them on every world they touched. We held positions that couldn't be held. We continued operations that couldn't be sustained. We lost billions of people and kept fighting because the alternative was extinction. The Admiral pulled up strategic maps from the Swarm War. Red markers showed human casualties. Blue markers showed swarm losses. The numbers were staggering on both sides. Every other species in the galaxy told us to retreat, to consolidate, to abandon the outer colonies and defend our core worlds with concentrated forces. The Kryn military advisors specifically recommended this strategy. It would have minimized your losses, Velthar said. Basic military doctrine. It also would have given the swarm years to breed unchecked in our territory. By the time we pushed back, they would have been unstoppable. Young-Ho met Velthar's eyes. So we ignored that advice. We held everywhere, all at once, no matter the cost, because we knew something other species didn't. What? That we could take those losses and keep fighting. That our soldiers would hold impossible positions for impossible lengths of time. That humans don't have a breaking point. Or if we do, it's so far beyond normal that it might as well not exist. The Admiral stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. After the war ended, our xenopsychologists studied combat stress across different species. They found that most species, including the Kryn, have clear psychological limits. Push a soldier too hard for too long, and they break. It's automatic, biological, unavoidable. This is known, Velthar confirmed. But humans don't work that way. We can be pushed to horrific extremes and still function. We suffer psychological damage, yes. Many of our veterans still struggle with trauma from the war. But they don't break in the middle of combat. They break later when it's safe. Young-Ho turned back to face Velthar. This is our strategic doctrine in a nutshell. We don't just endure war, we absorb it. We take punishment that would destroy other species and convert it into motivation. Every loss makes us more determined. Every setback makes us more creative. Every impossible situation reveals that humans are very good at doing impossible things. Velthar felt the truth of this settling into his understanding like a heavy weight. You are describing a species that weaponized survival itself. I suppose we are, the Admiral agreed. It's not something we're necessarily proud of. Many humans wish we were more like other species, more willing to seek peaceful solutions, less willing to sacrifice our people. But when faced with existential threats, our nature shows itself. A communication device on the Admiral's desk chimed. He glanced at it and smiled slightly. Commander, I've been authorized to share something with you. Top secret data that might help you understand the full picture. He pulled up files that made Velthar lean forward with interest. Military projections, war game scenarios, strategic assessments. These are our contingency plans, Young-Ho explained. Hypothetical scenarios for conflicts with various species, including the Kryn. Velthar stiffened. You have plans for war with my people? Every military plans for every contingency, the Admiral said calmly. I'm sure the Kryn have similar plans for conflict with humans. But look at the assessment. Velthar read through the data. The human military's conclusion was clear. In a conventional war with the Kryn, humans would lose most battles but win the overall conflict through attrition. You expect to lose most engagements? Velthar asked. Of course. You have superior warriors, better natural abilities, more combat experience. In any fair fight, Kryn win. But war isn't fair, and humans don't fight fair fights. The Admiral pulled up detailed scenarios. If war came, we wouldn't challenge you to honorable combat. We would make it messy, prolonged, impossible to win cleanly. We would fight in cities where your size is a disadvantage. We would attack supply lines and avoid direct engagement. We would make every world you take cost more than it's worth. Guerrilla warfare, Velthar said. Hiding, striking from shadows. The Kryn consider this cowardly. Which is exactly why it would work against you, Young-Ho replied. You train to fight honorable battles. We train to survive by any means necessary. You have a warrior culture. We have a survival culture. And in the end, survivors outlast warriors. Velthar was quiet for a long time, processing this. Everything he had learned over the past week crystallized into a clear understanding. Humans weren't weak. They were the most dangerous species in known space, precisely because they didn't rely on strength. Admiral, he said finally, I need to send a priority communication to my government. Of course. Use any of our secure channels. Velthar recorded a message to Ambassador Velkira, his direct superior in the Kryn military hierarchy. Ambassador, this is Commander Velthar reporting from my exchange assignment with human forces. I am transmitting a formal recommendation for immediate implementation. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Recommendation. Pursue full military and diplomatic alliance with humanity at any cost. Priority level. Critical. Reasoning. Humans represent the most formidable military force I have encountered in 80 years of service, not through technological or physical superiority, but through psychological and cultural factors that make them effectively undefeatable in any prolonged conflict. He detailed everything he had learned, the swarm war, the training programs, the survival culture, the strategic doctrine based on endurance rather than dominance. Conclusion. The Kryn cannot defeat humanity in any realistic scenario. We might win individual battles, but we would lose the war. Human casualties do not break human resolve. They strengthen it. Human suffering does not lead to surrender. It leads to adaptation. They are survivors who have weaponized survival itself. He added one final note. Personal assessment. I came to evaluate human warriors. I have learned that every human is a warrior, whether they wear a uniform or not. They don't have a warrior culture. They have a culture built on 10,000 years of continuous warfare and survival against impossible odds. Never make humanity your enemy. It is the only tactical certainty I can provide. After sending the message, Velthar turned back to Admiral Young-Ho. I appreciate your honesty, Admiral, and your willingness to share classified information. You needed to understand, Young-Ho said simply. Your people are considering closer ties with humanity. You deserve to know what you're aligning with. Or against, Velthar observed. Or against, the Admiral agreed. Though I hope it never comes to that. Captain Dae-Hyun entered the office, having been summoned by the Admiral. Commander Velthar, Dae-Hyun said, I thought you might like to see something before your assignment ends. They walked to an observation deck where human and Kryn soldiers were training together, sharing techniques, learning from each other, building the bonds that would become a lasting alliance. Velthar watched a young Kryn warrior, barely 40 years old, sparring with a human soldier. The Kryn had every physical advantage, but the human kept coming, absorbing blows that should have ended the match, finding ways to continue despite obvious disadvantage. Your people don't just endure war, Velthar said to Dae-Hyun. You were forged by it, shaped by 10,000 years of conflict into something that can't be broken. That's probably true, Dae-Hyun replied. But we prefer to use that strength to protect people now, not to conquer them. The Swarm War taught us that our abilities are better spent defending life than taking it. A noble sentiment, Velthar said, but the capacity remains. It does, Dae-Hyun admitted, and potential enemies should remember that. But our friends should also know. Everything that makes us dangerous in war makes us dependable in peace. We don't abandon our allies. We don't surrender our commitments. We endure alongside those we've sworn to protect. Velthar looked at the captain, this small, fragile-seeming human who contained within him the legacy of 10,000 years of warfare and survival. "I understand now," Velthar said. "And I will make sure my people understand as well. The Kryn and humanity will be allies, not enemies, because fighting you would be suicide, but standing beside you means standing beside the most persistent force in the galaxy." "I'll take that as a compliment," Daehyun said with a smile. As Velthar prepared to return to Kryn space, he made one final entry in his personal log. Final assessment of humanity. They are not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the most technologically advanced, not the most naturally gifted for warfare, but they are the most dangerous, because they simply will not stop. Every other species has limits beyond which they cannot be pushed. Humans have no such limits, or if they do, those limits are so extreme as to be effectively infinite. Recommendation stands. Full alliance. Maximum cooperation. Never, under any circumstances, make humanity your enemy, because they will outlast you. They will outendure you. They will keep coming long after any rational species would have quit. They are survivors, and in the end, survivors always win. He looked out at the stars one last time before boarding his ship. Somewhere in the galaxy, threats existed that might one day challenge both Kryn and humans. When that day came, Velthar would stand beside his human allies, and he pitied whatever enemy faced them together. A species of warriors joined with a species of survivors. The combination would be unstoppable, just as humans had always been, just as they always would be.